For more than 60 years she was a ghost. A name on a fading file, a face on a missing person poster curling at the edges. In the summer of 1962, Audrey Backeberg stepped out of her small Wisconsin home and vanished, leaving 2 children waiting for a mother who never came back. Neighbors whispered. Detectives searched. Decades passed. Her story became a cautionary tale, a cold case no one expected to solve. But in the spring of 2025, a single phone call cracked the silence. A cold case detective, sifting through the dust of history, dialed a number tied to a new name. And on the other end of the line, a steady voice answered. She was alive. She had always been alive. This is not the story of a crime scene uncovered, but of a decision that spanned a lifetime, and a mystery that refused to die. Before she became a mystery, Audrey Backeberg was a young woman woven into the quiet fabric of Reedsburg, Wisconsin. It was the early 1960s, a time of woolen mills and corner cafes, of neighbors who knew each other's names. Audrey was only 20, a wife, a mother of 2 toddlers with bright eyes and sticky hands. She worked shifts at the local mill, clocking in before sunrise, clocking out to return to her small rented home on a tree-lined street. But behind the neat curtains and tidy sidewalks, life was not as steady as it seemed. Police records show she had filed a criminal complaint against her husband, alleging threats and violence. Friends noticed the way her smile sometimes faltered. She was caught between duty and fear, between a future she had imagined and one she wanted to escape. In photographs from that time, she looks like any other young mother of the era, hair neatly set, a faint smile, a baby on her hip. No one looking at her then could have guessed she would soon walk out of Reedsburg and into history, leaving only questions where her life used to be. It was a warm Saturday in Reedsburg, July 7, 1962. The air smelled of summer rain and cut grass. Audrey Backeberg buttoned her coat, lifted her purse, and told the babysitter she'd be back soon, just a quick trip to collect her paycheck from the woolen mill. Her 2 children were left in trusted care, playing quietly in the living room as the screen door closed behind their mother. She was supposed to be back by supper. She never walked through the door again. Hours later, the babysitter would tell investigators a story that would become the final thread anyone had of Audrey's life. She said she and Audrey had hitchhiked together to Madison, boarded a Greyhound bound for Indianapolis. When they arrived, Audrey stepped off the bus, walked around a corner into the city, and vanished, as if the street had swallowed her whole. Back in Reedsburg, 2 small children waited at the window for a mother who would not return. The neighbors whispered. The clock ticked. A young woman was gone without a trace, and an entire family was left staring at an empty doorway. In the first frantic days after Audrey vanished, questions outnumbered answers. Sheriff's deputies canvassed the roads between Reedsburg and Madison. Calls were made to bus stations and boarding houses. Posters bearing her photograph went up in diners and post offices. But each lead ended in the same place, nowhere. Weeks became months. Her children were placed in the care of relatives. Witness memories blurred at the edges. Without interstate databases or digital footprints, a young woman could simply disappear, and Audrey had. Detectives reopened the file again and again. Some believed she had met with foul play, others whispered she'd run to freedom. Her siblings wrote letters into the void. Each birthday, each Christmas, passed with an empty chair at the table and a gnawing question that would not let go. By the 1970s, the case was a single manila folder tucked into a cold case cabinet, edges soft from handling, contents yellowing with age. For decades it sat in silence, a ghost story in a sheriff's office, waiting for someone to pick it up again. While Reedsburg mourned a mystery, somewhere beyond Wisconsin a woman was quietly rebuilding her life. Audrey Backeberg slipped beneath the surface of official records, her name changing like a river's course. In a time before digital trails, a bus ticket and a new address could erase an entire identity. For more than 6 decades she lived outside the lines of the life she'd left behind. No public trace, no letters home. Perhaps there was a new job, a new husband, maybe even new children, details locked behind privacy and choice. What is known is that she stayed hidden in plain sight, moving through her days as another person while her first name became a rumor back in Reedsburg. The freedom of reinvention carried its own kind of exile. Each birthday passed unmarked by her original family. Each milestone in her children's lives happened without her there to see. In Wisconsin, she was a ghost. In another state, she was simply a neighbor, a coworker, a friend. For 63 years, Audrey Backeberg lived a life only she truly understood, her secret intact, the mystery growing colder with each passing season. The manila folder sat untouched for years, but in 2024 a new detective reached for it. Isaac Hansen, young enough to bring fresh eyes, old enough to respect the weight of ghosts, opened the file and began to read. Inside were brutal reports, grainy photos, and a name that had been missing longer than he had been alive. Where others had seen dead ends, he saw new roads. He combed through archives, pulled census data, and began threading together fragments of a life. Using a genealogy account registered to Audrey's sister, he pored over death certificates, arrest logs, and decades-old addresses. Each clue was like a faint echo in a dark room, guiding him forward. Then, at last, a pattern emerged, an arrest record under a different name, a birth date that matched, a paper trail that whispered what no one dared hope: Audrey Backeberg had survived. She was alive, living quietly in another state, her secret unbroken for 63 years. With a mixture of caution and resolve, Hansen picked up the phone. He dialed the number tied to that new identity, the sound of the ringing line filling the silence of the sheriff's office. Somewhere far from Wisconsin, a phone began to buzz, and the mystery that had haunted Reedsburg for generations was about to speak. The phone rang only a few times before a woman answered. Her voice was steady, unhurried. When Detective Hansen introduced himself and said the name Audrey Backeberg, there was no gasp, no confusion. She simply listened. And then, as if exhaling a lifetime, she confirmed what the cold case file had been waiting to hear for 63 years. She was Audrey. There was no arrest to make, no crime scene to process. Instead, Hansen spoke with a woman who had built an entire life far from the shadow of her disappearance. She told him she was happy, confident in her decision, with no regrets. She had chosen to leave, she had chosen to stay hidden. For decades the world thought she was dead, but she had been alive, quietly moving through the seasons under another name. Back in Wisconsin, the sheriff's office drafted a statement for the public. After all the theories, the whispered rumors, the unending search, the truth was at once simple and astonishing: Audrey Backeberg's disappearance was voluntary. She had walked away, and she had survived. A mystery had not been solved so much as it had been revealed by its keeper herself. In Reedsburg, the news landed like a stone dropped into still water. For the children who had grown old without their mother, for siblings who had written letters into silence, the mystery was over, but the emotions were just beginning. There was no public scene of embrace at an airport, no cameras capturing a tearful reunion. The details of Audrey's return to her old identity, or whether she would reconnect with family, remain private, a choice she still holds close after 6 decades of secrecy. Yet even without photographs, the impact is unmistakable. Somewhere, letters have been written, calls made, quiet conversations unfolding after a lifetime of unanswered questions. For those who waited, the ending was not a grave but a heartbeat, not closure through loss but through the startling survival of someone they thought gone forever. In the sheriff's office, the file was finally stamped resolved. In living rooms across Wisconsin, people who had grown up with the legend of the vanished young mother whispered her name again, not as a ghost story, but as a woman who had taken her life into her own hands and endured. A file may be closed, but the echoes of it stay in the rooms where people waited, in the hearts of children who grew up wondering. Audrey Backeberg's life did not end on July 7, 1962, it split. One path led to decades of secrecy, the other to a town that never stopped whispering her name. Her story forces us to sit with uncomfortable truths, that someone can vanish without crime, that the reasons may be hidden pain, fear, or a yearning for a different life. It also proves that even the coldest cases can thaw when persistence meets new tools like genealogy and digital records. If you're watching this and you've lived with unanswered questions, about a missing loved one, an unexplained gap, a case you can't stop thinking about, let Audrey's case remind you that silence does not always equal death. Someone somewhere might still be waiting to be found. Support your local cold case units. Share information when you have it. If you have tips, even decades old, don't assume it's too late. Persistence, empathy, and new science bring light to the places where families have been living in the dark for years. And as you leave this story, carry with you a simple but urgent truth: every missing person is more than a file. They are a life. A heartbeat. A story still being written.